Good evening and welcome to the January 25th, 2023 Finance Committee meeting. Committee members present this evening, myself, Councilor Di Natale, as Chair, President Zarella, Vice President Van Hazinga, Councilors Boschman and Cruz. Please be advised that FATV is conducting an audio and video recording of this meeting for public broadcast. I ask that anyone in the audience who is recording this meeting to please identify themselves to the record now by standing and stating their name and address. Seeing none, at this time I ask that all electronic devices be placed into silent mode. The public has been advised to contact the City Clerk's office regarding any comment of no more than 2 minutes. I'm told by FATV that there were no online comments submitted, nor is anyone on Zoom wanting to speak. I do allow a public forum, 2 to 3 minutes for anybody in the public that would like to speak on any matter before us. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on any matter before us? Seeing none, we will move on to the agenda. 015-23, order that there be and hereby is transferred from within the sum of $42,955 to be transferred from reserve for other municipal purposes, capital expenses, and credited to building capital expenditures vehicle replacement for the purpose of placing one vehicle used by the building department inspectors. Commissioner Barbadaro is not here this evening. He did not tell me he wasn't going to be here. I'm starting with this just to read the letter he submitted and the quote, and if councilors have questions for him, I will entertain a motion to hold it and we'll move on, but if councilors don't have questions, that's why I'm just going to take it up and see what happens. So the letter from Mr. Barbadaro to the mayor on January 9th states as follows: I respectfully request an appropriation of $42,955 from available funds in order to purchase a new Ford Explorer. Currently, the building department has one 2022 Ford Explorer and 4 2013 Ford Explorers. These vehicles are becoming expensive to maintain due to their age and mileage. I am proposing that we replace one vehicle a year until the fleet is newer. If we replace one a year, the oldest one will be 14 years old when it's replaced. I see the commissioner just joined us. There was provided in our packets a quote for the vehicle, a 2023 Ford Explorer base four-wheel drive with some other attachments equaling the $43,000 and change. Are there any questions from the committee for the commissioner on this purchase request?
Make a motion we accept.
Second. I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded to accept the request, the order. If there are no objections, I'll take this under unanimous consent. Seeing none, it's favorably recommended. Thank you for coming. And I'll just say that, sometimes I get asked questions of why we just pass it, there's no discussion, or we really do have a lot of discussion in this committee. But in this case, if people recall, last year the commissioner was before us to replace a vehicle that was damaged due to an accident, and he came in for a vehicle that was well over $60,000, and I know Councilor Van Hazinga was really pressing him, and we all agreed that I think we need to lower that price for a building inspector vehicle because there was a lot of bells and whistles. So he did. We got it down to around $40,000, which is the price of what these are going for. And now this one is another vehicle in his fleet. He's got 4, and this one replaced a 10-year-old model that's costing a lot in maintenance. So as far as I see it, and for the committee, in my opinion, this is, fleet maintenance that we do in a lot of our departments, and that's why we had a lot of discussion on this last year when the first vehicle came before us. So this is just a continuation of that.
And just to add a quick comment that I appreciate it's part of a plan to gradually update the fleet and avoid having to buy 6 vehicles at once in any given year, to spread it over a little.
Mr. Chair, just remember, the DPW tools should replace every year.
Yep.
Okay,
they are always front and center on fleet maintenance. Yes. Yep. Next, I'll take 16 and 17 together. 1623 is an order that the City of Fitchburg approves the expenditure of funds from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, SAFE grant, in the approximate amount of $5,481 for the purpose of said grant, which is to continue to teach fire safety to students. And 1723 is an order that the City of Fitchburg approves the expenditure of funds from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Office of Public Safety and Security SAFE grant in the approximate amount of $2,477 for the purpose of said grant, which is to educate seniors in the community regarding fire and life safety topics. These two grant orders are recurring grant orders that we see every year in this committee to continue those efforts. And that is what the letter from Fire Chief Suarez pertains to with regards to these. He goes on to state, the fire chief, in his letter, that these programs have been very successful and have enabled many children in the city to take the proper actions during emergency situations, and especially for teaching senior citizens about the importance of fire safety regarding cooking fires, electrical fires, which can pose a greater risk of fire death in those areas. Council Boschman, if you have a question for the fire chief, yeah.
All I want to know.
Good evening, councilors.
Hi, how are you doing? Do you go up to Daniel Heights and St. Joseph House when you do these presentations for the elderly?
Yes,
You do.
yes.
And Daniel Heights.
With the senior, yes, with the senior safe program.
Yeah.
Yeah. Firefighter Fraticelli does that. He hits all of the senior homes.
Okay, I appreciate that. That was the only question I had.
Make a motion to accept. Second.
Motion made and seconded to accept 16 and 17. If there are no objections, I'll take this on unanimous consent. Seeing none, they're both recommended favorably to the council.
Thank you.
Next, we have 1823, in order that the City of Fitchburg hereby approves the expenditure of funds from the Massachusetts Executive Office of Public Safety and Security VAWA grant in the approximate amount of $60,530.07 for the purpose of said grant, which is to support the domestic violence advocate position within the police department. This is another recurring grant that we receive every year for that position. And Chief Martineau's letter to the council or to the mayor states that this grant supports our domestic violence advocate position, along with partial associated expenses and benefits. This position has become vital to our department's success by assisting victims in court with emergency housing, medical attention, referral services, and creating a support network. Any questions from the committee on this grant order?
Motion to approve.
Captain Giannini here if anybody has questions. We have a motion to approve.
Second?
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded to approve the grant order. If there are no objections, I'll take this on unanimous consent. Seeing none, it passes. Next, we have 1923, order that the City of Fitchburg approves the expenditure of funds from the Mass Executive Office of Public Safety and Security FY23 Shannon Community Safety Initiative Grant in the approximate amount of $416,812 for the purpose of the grant, which is to reduce gang and youth-related violence. Another recurring grant order from the state for the intended purpose that we have seen repeatedly each year. The letter from the chief to the mayor states that Fitchburg is partnering with multiple agencies that support towns in Worcester County with special focus on Fitchburg, Leominster, and Gardner, offering a wide range of services designed to reduce gang violence and educate youth at risk of juvenile justice involvement. Fitchburg PD is the fiscal agent for this grant, as well as co-monitor of programmatic activities. These funding sources will be used to support proactive patrols, reduction of school truancy, provide funding for junior police academies, to supplement outreach agency programs, support after-school programs and anti-drug education, and provide equipment for these programs and facilitate restorative justice training for participating agencies. President Zarella.
Just one quick question so that I'm clear on the numbers. Is this amount that we are approving the amount that will go towards Fitchburg operations, or is it the total amount of the grant which will be then utilized across the communities?
No, you're approving the total amount that goes across all the communities, Fitchburg Police as well as all of our partners.
All right. I'll make a motion. Oh, I remember, Councilor
Boschman.
Number one, how much money do we get from Fitchburg?
Fitchburg Police gets roughly $80,000.
80?
Some of the other partners are also based out of Fitchburg. Do you want to know how much they get or just how much?
No, I'm just concerned about Fitchburg. The other bases are not.
80,000.
My 80,000. My second question to you, the chair said that you guys do truancy. When you say truancy, what do you mean? When kids skip school, you go to their house and knock on the doors and bring them to school?
Correct. We have truancy patrols that our officers go to meet with the SROs of the respective schools across the city. They meet with the administration also. They get a list of kids that did not show up for school that day, and then they go to the house and try to find out why.
Oh, so you actually go to every house that the kids miss?
Correct.
Okay, I like that program. I really do. I think it's very educational. We need that. And what happens if the parents doesn't have a good excuse to say, my son or daughter didn't want to go to school? That does happen.
I mean, if the parent says the child's not going, then the child's not going. But quite often we get there, and if they are having trouble with the child and the child is just being difficult, we sit down and talk with with the child and the parent, and usually we can convince them to go. I mean, we have the type of training that that's why we're going out on those deployments. So our guys are pretty good at it.
Okay, I'm totally for that. 100% for that. Keep up the good work if you're doing what you said.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Motion to approve?
I have Councilor Cruz. Councilor Cruz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What sort of other things are the police doing with the youth? Is it like?
Our annual Junior Police Academy is paid for entirely through the Shannon Grant. That goes mostly towards supplies, which would be the uniforms, water bottles, and equipment that they use that week. We do the truancy patrol, like the councilor mentioned. We have something called mentoring, which our officers go to various parks in the city in the nice weather, and they go to the YMCA in the colder weather, and they interact with the children there, the homework club, even if it's something like playing basketball, they just interact in building relationships. We have hotspot patrol, which is deployments. That's more of a enforcement patrol. Our crime analyst tells us the hotspots in the city and where to go, and they go out for the specific purpose of looking for criminal activity.
But there's quite a bit of positive interaction between youth and the police department.
There is. Between the truancy mentoring and the Junior Police Academy, there's a lot of positive interactions.
And what kind of metrics do we have right now to confirm the positive results?
Last year alone, our mentoring, we talked to over 1,000 children throughout the city. Trying to think. For hotspots, we took 3 guns off the street, 34 arrests, and several dozen drug arrests also. So there's definitely measurables that show that it's working.
Okay. Make a motion to approve.
Second?
I have Council Boschman, second question.
This $400,000 of 4/16/17, we get that every year? And how long does it last? Is that going to be guaranteed for
The
every
Shannon Grant is done per calendar year.
Yeah.
It's not the exact same amount every year. This is a little bit more than we got last year, and it seems to go up incrementally each year. But it's roughly in the ballpark year to year.
All right. Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve 1923. If there are no objections, I'll take this under unanimous consent. Seeing none, passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
2023, in order that there be and hereby is transferred from within the sum of $25,000 to be transferred from police personal services, civilian dispatchers, and credited to police personal services dispatcher overtime. Chief Martineau.
Good evening, councilors. This first order before you is a request to transfer funds within the department budget. As you're well aware of, we've experienced significant shortfall this year in personnel. And in dispatch, at one point we were down to 7 dispatches in a room that were budgeted for 12. When you short that many dispatches, obviously you have to fill it with backfill through overtime. We ran into problems where we didn't even have dispatches to backfill, and we had to move police officers in there at a higher rate. So we're anticipating a significant shortfall in our dispatch overtime budget. Thus, that's why I asked for the moving of funds within our budget from dispatch personnel to dispatch overtime. Be happy to answer any questions relative to that.
Council Boschman.
I'm going to mention it again. I keep on saying it almost every year. I believe in regional dispatch. I think since we're having trouble with the people in your department, I think a regional dispatch would be great. We could, I believe we could save money if we look into the possibility. I went to a seminar and they were talking about that at the MMA. And a lot of communities are doing that where they have one central location and they do dispatch from there, and it works fine.
I'd be happy to discuss regionalizations further with you. We've had significant conversations, Counselor, already on this subject. I think regional PSAPs work in the smaller communities. Community as challenging as Fitchburg, our size or bigger. Sometimes they don't work as effectively. You know, whether it's dispatch, police officers, DPW, we're all struggling with personnel, staffing issues. I don't think it's just relative to dispatch. I'm open to discussions on regionalization. However, speaking to my counterparts across the Commonwealth, cities that are our size or greater, there's significant challenges. You lose a little bit of anonymity when you go to a regional effort. So at this point, it's nothing that I'm exploring. But just like as always, I'm open to discussion. I'm just not sure it's the right fit for the city of Fitchburg.
Councilor Van Hazinga.
Thank you. How are you doing with your current staffing with dispatchers? I think I saw a posting go through recently.
We did. We had to put a posting up just a couple of days ago for dispatch. Like I said, we're budgeted for 12. Currently, we have 10 in that room. As you're well aware of, dispatch has become a feeding ground for future police officers, and the turnover tends to be a little bit quite more frequent in that room. We're anticipating losing maybe 1 or 2 more dispatches, which will bring us back down to 8. Obviously, the optimum number is 12, which is what we try to strive for. We received probably 4 or 5 applications just in one day for the position. So once we reach a certain point, then we'll call for a dispatch exam and try to start vetting new dispatches into the room. It's a very demanding job, to say the least, and it really takes a special person to do that job. So we do our due diligence when we're vetting candidates. And we're constantly being proactive on attracting new candidates to be emergency dispatchers.
So with the current posting, are you looking to hire 2 more to get up to 12?
Tentatively 2. Obviously, we're going to vet more than 2. It's nice to have a reserve of candidates that we've already vetted. We've done, you know, obviously a lot goes into hiring dispatchers because they're going to be able to get to sensitive information. So a lot of due diligence, not as much as hiring a police officer, but pretty close to it. So a lot of work is tasked by Captain Giannini that oversees the training division on bringing in the right personnel. But currently, yes, I do have 2 open vacancies with anticipation of at least a couple more between now and the end of the fiscal year. So that's the reason we're advertising at this point.
Okay. Now, I remember we did increase the salary for the position recently to make it more competitive with other communities.
We did.
Has that helped increase applications or decrease turnover a little bit?
I think it's helped significantly. Fitchburg is now the leader when it comes to compensation for emergency 911 dispatch. There's a few other spots that pay a little bit greater than we do, but you know, by increasing the salary, we became competitive, and we're always looking for ways to really, you know, entice dispatchers to come to our department. Like I said, it's a great learning spot for future police officers because you come into the department. That's something you lose with regionalization, Counselor. Having the members within the department starting to understand the culture of policing and how to effectively speak with people that are calling 911 during a crisis is extremely important. So, you know, it's a work in progress. We got to continue doing everything we can to attract the right candidates to come to the city. The council did their due diligence by approving their salary last time around in the last contract, and I'm hoping that we have another successful group of candidates trying to apply.
Good. I hope you get some great candidates. Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve 20-23. There are no objections. I'll take this on unanimous consent. Seeing none, passes. Next, we have 21-23, order that there be and hereby is transferred from within the sum of $237,054.20, same to be transferred from Police Personal Services Patrolman, $200,000, and from Police Personal Services Professional Standard, $37,054.20, and credited to Police Personal Services Overtime. Chief Martineau.
Thank you. This is a little bit different than what I just explained from a dispatch level. There's been several factors which has resulted in me anticipating a shortfall in our budgeted overtime account. As you're well aware of, last year I was approved for $525,000 for overtime for this fiscal year. We've been faced with several different challenges this past year, and you know, it began in July in the way we started configuring our overtime based on our educational incentive. We started paying overtime relative to educational incentive a little bit different starting July 1st. In previous years, educational incentive was taken out of a specific line item in our budget, and that's where the overtime came from. We changed the manner in which we paid overtime, and starting in July, overtime was paid every 2 weeks in accordance to whatever educational level they were at. So that money was now coming out of the specific line item directed towards overtime, and it was not coming out of the line item for educational incentive. That immediately started creating discrepancies in our overtime budget. So that was the first thing that impacted the shortfall. The second thing that impacted, for obvious reasons, is staffing issues. You know, at one point this year, I believe we were down 13, 14 positions. We've been somewhat successful trying to regain some of our rank and file. The captain and his team are doing their due diligence. They've been working hard trying to attract candidates, vet candidates to be police officers. Currently, we're still 7 positions short with an anticipated retirement in May. So in May, we're going to be down 8 budgeted positions. When you're down that many positions, the obvious thing is going to happen, overtime is going to ensue. So we're still continuing to face overtime issues because of staffing levels. I anticipate we have a list of 9 potential candidates right now, so we're anticipating in the next month I will be bringing to the council at least hopefully 6 or 7 names that we can vet out and get them to the next available academy, which I believe is in April. That will help out, that will alleviate a little bit. The third part that's impacting overtime this year is the way we pay compensated comp time. Our department utilizes compensatory time to our advantage. Compensatory time is paid in lieu of overtime. As you're well aware of, the amount of training that goes in to law enforcement on a yearly basis is substantial. If we want to remain a very competitive, transparent agency, training is probably the best thing that we can do for our city and for our police officers. So we do a considerable amount of training. Unfortunately, training has to be done on a day off. It's not as simple as just doing it on your day of work. Most training occurs outside of the day of work. So in lieu of paying overtime, we use compensatory time to our advantage, and we award compensatory time in lieu of overtime when they're doing that training. Well, at some point, the compensatory time was increasing, and officers were accruing a significant amount of compensatory time in their stored bank at this police department. We've worked extremely diligently over the last 6-7 years to reduce that exposure of the amount of compensatory time that is out. And what we're seeing, what's happened in this last year, we've had officers that are either retiring or requesting their compensatory time to be awarded to them. And when that happens, because compensatory time is given in lieu of overtime, that money is being withdrawn from our overtime account. That's one of those items that I can't forecast and budget because, quite frankly, I'm not sure who's going to be asking for the compensatory time, whether it's through a retirement or through a family emergency. I think just this year, if my calculations are correct, we've had to pay out almost $100,000 in compensatory time requests, which were withdrawn from our overtime budget. That, in addition, coupled with the other 2 incidents, has really drastically reduced the overtime. Knowing that we were going to get to this point, I evaluated the budget. Fortunately, we do have funds within the budget that I am able to move stuff around. We kind of try to forecast what's going to happen between now and the end of the year. Last year, as you recall, last year I was budgeted for approximately $485,000. I came in front of the council much later in the year, but I had to move roughly $150,000 in overtime to get us up to about $650 and change in overtime. This year, I'm at 525 with this moving of $237,000 within the budget. That will bring me up to around the 770 mark in overtime. Is that going to be sufficient? I wish I could tell you yes. I don't know what the next 3-4 months are going to bring. I can tell you that the way that we pay our officers or compensate our officers for training works. It works, and it works well. For instance, last year, we awarded, I want to say, 8,000 hours department-wide in compensatory time. That would have been 8,000 hours in overtime that if we would have paid out if we weren't awarding compensatory time. Out of that 8,000 hours, 7,000 of those hours were used by officers to take days off. The nice part about taking a day off with compensatory time, you can't take that day off if it creates overtime. So it's a net sum response back to the city. So you can understand how important it is to utilize compensatory time to its advantage. I could give you examples of other cities and towns that do just the opposite, where they say overtime is overtime, and they do all their training on overtime. I know of some similar sized departments our size, same issues, pretty much identical to us. Their overtime budgets are $1.3, $1.4 million, significantly higher. I think the avenue we've chosen of awarding compensatory time works, and it works well for the city. However, there's going to be incidences where people are retiring, and we have to pay that compensatory time off, or when people run into an emergency and they withdraw from their compensatory time. So that's something that's tough to track, but it's always present, and that's what we've run into in this situation. So as you can see, this is a little different, or much different than our dispatch situation. This is something that we track on a weekly basis, monitoring our overtime and making sure that we're spending it in the most prudent way to provide safety and security in the city. And I'll leave it at that. I'll be happy to answer questions on what's happening in the department as it's relative to overtime and distribution of force.
So you mentioned 3 factors. Let's start with the very last one you mentioned, the compensatory.
Yes.
Has that always been the case? Every year? That's how we operate?
Compensatory time has been a part of that police department for 30 years.
Okay.
It really came to light in the last 20-plus years because there was really no oversight, and we had certain employees that used compensatory time as a bank to just store it up until they retire. And it got to a point where these numbers were starting to get a little bit out of control. You could have some employees that were retiring with 1,000 hours of compensatory time that they earned in 2000, and now they're retiring in 2022. As a finance guy, counsel, you can understand the return on that investment. So in the last 8 years, under my tenure as chief, I've worked diligently to reduce that exposure. Up to 8 years ago, it was unlimited. The officers were accumulating unlimited amount of compensatory time. And I saw firsthand how dangerous that could be, because at some point, some chief's going to be standing in front of council saying, we have to pay out $500,000 because of retirements. And quite frankly, I didn't want to be that chief. So not this contract, but last contract, we were able to successfully negotiate with the union to put a cap on compensatory time, which we did. The last contract, we brought compensatory time down to the FLSA standard of 480 hours. So we took this huge cap and we reduced it down to 480 hours. Anybody currently in the department with greater than 480 hours weren't eligible for comp time. We were paying them now overtime, whether they were training or for whatever reason. Anybody below 480 could continue to accumulate that. As you're going to hear shortly, we just completed another successful negotiations, and I wanted to push the envelope a little bit further. So this time I was able to successfully negotiate taking that 480 down to 240. At some point, we're going to put a hold on that, but I think 240 is a good number because, like I told you, I have a substantial group at the police department that utilizes compensatory time to take a day off in the summer or take a day off here and there, and it's not costing the city any overtime to backfill that position. So compensatory time is a good thing. Managing it is imperative, which I think we're doing. Thus, the reason for some of these shortfalls we're seeing now, Counselor.
So the reason for my questions is because when we always get an overtime transfer request, whether it's from free cash or within the budget, it's usually because of either events that occurred that we did not plan for, staffing shortages for whatever reason. What I'm trying to focus on with the three reasons you mentioned is what's really a recurring matter with overtime and what's more of a one-time. I mean, this is the first time I've heard of this, so I would assume that this compensatory matter is not going to be a driver in the future. Is it, or if it has, it hasn't been the primary reason?
I feel very, I have two paths that I can take. I can totally eliminate compensatory time and focus solely on overtime. In my annual report, it dictates exactly how many hours of training that my police officers do in a given year. The training is substantial, and I attribute all the success that the Fitchburg Police Department has had over the years is because we're an extremely well-trained police organization, and we train to the highest standards. So we can't go backwards on training. That being said, I don't think we're in a position like some other communities to just shell out $1.3 million in an overtime budget. I don't think that's an effective use. I think a combination of an effective compensatory time program with some oversight is the path in which the city should go. That being said, in the meantime, I still have a small subset of police officers that have accumulated compensatory time that are either going to retire or they're going to request funds to be given to them because, quite frankly, that was time that they earned. Here lies the issue right now. For instance, I spoke this evening about a retiring member. Anytime a member retires, if they have compensatory time, we pay them out for the comp time that we owe them. So in this case, I have a retirement, there's going to be a request. That's happened several times this year, and like I said, we have paid out close to $100,000 that has been attached to my overtime budget because, in essence, it was compensatory time in lieu of overtime, which is the right spot for it to come out. I've had several discussions with the auditor on this, and I think he's in agreement that that's the right place that withdraw these funds from is in the personal time account.
I'm not questioning that. I want to understand for future instances, is this a recurring factor going forward in any overtime increase requests? Because I've never really heard of this prior to tonight.
So the short answer is yes, this is a recurring factor. I have to be, as we start preparing for FY24, which I can't believe we're already doing, but as we start preparing, it's going to take significant anticipation over the next course year. I have to look at who's retiring, what does their comp time bank look like, and should I be adding extra funds to my overtime? I can tell you, without even taking out a pencil to look at FY24, I'm going to have to ask for additional funds in overtime in anticipation of this. Not only that, but because of the first instance, the way that we're paying overtime based on educational incentive, it's imperative. The days of the 485 or 525 are gone, just because of the way we're paying out things now. And I'm telling you, when I travel across the state and talk to my colleagues, my other chiefs, they're blown away that my overtime budget was only 485, 525. And they wish they could get their communities to a more comprehensive program centered around compensatory time in lieu of overtime for training.
So it's always been a factor, but not to this extent.
No, we're starting to see the end part of it.
Right.
And that's why it was such an urgency to get to a point to control it.
Right. And so now that we got to that end point, the control mechanism was through the negotiations. We're going forward. It shouldn't be as much of a factor considering how we have significantly reduced that number down to a cap level of 240.
I anticipate exactly that. Now, each year, we're tasked with calculated uncompensated risks. So we're looking at the entire accrued amount of personal time, vacation time throughout the department, and we generate a number, and that is exactly how many hours personnel have in their individual banks. all those hours have a dollar sign attached to them. It may not be budgeted in any one spot, but they have a dollar sign, and that's what keeps auditors up at night, is these risks that are out there. There's no way to control it other than what we've been doing by eliminating that risk from unlimited to 480 and to now 240. I think as a city, we've made significant grounds reducing that threat.
That's great. I mean, the second factor is usually the principal reason that you come before us is, you know, you're short on staff, not budgetary, just we have a difficulty filling positions. You've mentioned in the past that it takes upwards of north of 20 months, 24 months for a new recruit to go through the academy, go through their period until they're on the beat by themselves. So with these slew of appointments that are coming up to fill most of that 7-member vacancy, soon to be 8, we're not going to see those officers on the beat until fiscal year 25?
No. I think the more realistic number is 32 weeks, 34 weeks. So we're anticipating putting 7 police officers in hopefully 8 in April. They will be out there doing independent work by January of 24. So 6 to 7 months. You're getting zero work out of them because you're in that stage of training and field training. So it takes a while.
But it's a balancing act because you guys don't know, same with the firefighters, I'm sure, you don't know exactly when someone's going to retire. I mean, do you get ample notice from the retiree, or is it just one day he or she walks in and goes, I'm done in 2 weeks?
It depends on what's going on in the world.
Okay.
There could be an incident that happens tomorrow, and I have 5 police officers looking to resign. So I don't know. Yeah. Okay. You know, anticipatory hiring is a topic that I'm always having discussions with the mayor's office and the HR department. Anticipating hiring ahead of time, since it does take a 6-7 month window. But quite frankly, I can tell you the overtime line item is something that is reviewed weekly by myself and my staff. I'm well aware of the complexity of managing city taxpayer money on overtime, and here we are this evening.
I want to say, in my experience, this is probably one of the highest numbers of overtime we'd have in this budget in quite a while, but it's also an unprecedented period of time for the police profession that has contributed to this in terms of recruitment and getting interest. Because I want the taxpayers to understand tonight, when they look at the overtime number, they just think people are just hitting it willy-nilly. They don't really need it, or they're just getting extra money, and we have a need to fill. So it's there as a safety net for that staffing issues that may arise. But this year it's just as much exacerbated, more so than any other year, correct, in terms of the shortage, the difficulties, because that would contribute a big reason as to why this number is so high this year.
That's why I tried to exemplify all 3 scenarios here. Right. It would be just as easy if you were to come in front of this group and say, I'm down 7 bodies, I need this overtime. Mm-hmm. There's more factors here involved, much more factors, and I think being transparent with the council and the public in general makes it a little bit easier to accept that, you know, guess what, I need $700,000, $800,000 in overtime. The alternative is $1.3 million in overtime, or a less trained police department, and that's one that I would be happy to argue with anybody.
So back to my original reason why I was asking these questions is recurring or non-recurring. It sounds like it's recurring, but it should be at a declining rate because of the mitigation efforts of negotiating that compensatory cap down, coupled with the fact that once we get these officers on the beat, there won't be as greater need to backfill those open positions with overtime. So it's a timing thing in that respect, and then a compensatory issue, it's the cap that will lessen that impact. That's what I'm trying to zero in on.
Sure.
This isn't a new normal going forward. If we get those officers' positions filled and the cap is in place, we shouldn't see as many requests for a large increase as what we're seeing tonight. We hope.
I would anticipate. Now, that being said, I'm not going to stand up here and say this is going to cover me till July.
Right.
If I have 5 or 6 police officers come in for one reason or another, request to be paid the compensatory time that they have accrued, I could be back in front of this body in 2 months saying, I need another X amount of dollars. So that's a possibility. But the good thing is, if those officers come in and withdraw from their compensatory time bank, they can never go above 240 hours again. So, the ultimate goal is to get everybody in that department at that 240 level where it's a lot much more manageable when I'm presenting to the finance saying this is what I need in my overtime budget.
Council Zarella, Council Fall.
Thank you. I just want to thank you, Chief, both for your efforts at mitigation of this issue proactively, but also, and I think this is something that's often underappreciated by the general public, for the work that you, and I know other department heads and Chief, and I'm sure Chief Suarez as well, that you do this internal work to find the money in your own budget rather than, I'm sure it would be a lot easier for you to just come to us and say, need more money. Can you approve some more money out of free cash for me? It would take a lot less work on your part, I'm sure, to do that, but I really appreciate that you've gone to the effort of going through your internal departmental budget line by line and finding money to move around first, so that if you do come to us with a request for additional funding from outside your department, from the general fund, we know that it's only because there's an unprecedented situation that you tried to handle internally and couldn't. I want to highlight that for the public, that this is not new funds that's being taken away from some other city function. This is something where you've done the work to find the money, and we're just moving it at your request from one line item to another. And I appreciate that, and I think that anyone watching this should appreciate that as well.
Thank you.
Council Boschman?
Let me say something. If you had 87 men and you came back in front of this council and you asked for more money for overtime, I would complain. But I don't complain because I know you're sharp men, because I know where I worked somewhere else, they didn't hire people. They would prefer to give overtime than put somebody on the books, because it was cheaper in the long run not to hire an employee, but to pay overtime to the other employees. That's what I found out when I worked at General Electric. Sometimes they didn't hire people. They'd rather just pay us overtime before they put somebody on, because we got to pay all their benefits and everything else. So I wouldn't complain anyway. I wouldn't do that to you. Complain about that. Unless if you had your 87 men, and then you came back in with us for $1 million more, then I'd complain. I would say something.
May I comment on that, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
First of all, the comparing General Electric to public safety is apples and oranges. If I was at 87 police officers, I still would have an overtime need. My men and women work very hard, and they're entitled to their time off. Time off equates to vacancies. Vacancies equate to less public safety. So there's always going to be a need for overtime. When you're running a 24 hours a day, 7 days operation tasked with providing public safety to 42,000 residents, overtime will always be a factor. How you manage that overtime is the most important thing. I appreciate your opinion on that. And like I said, we take overtime very serious. This is taxpayer money, and we have to spend it appropriately. I'm in front of the Finance Committee tonight being transparent with what's happened at the police station. But what I'd like to reiterate is overtime will always be necessary, because we are a 24/7 operation, much like the fire department, that we have to provide public safety to our citizens. Thank you.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve 21-23. If there are no objections, I'll take this on unanimous consent. Seeing none, passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. 22-23, in order that there be and hereby is appropriated the sum of $500,000 to be charged against available funds and credited to stabilization fund. Councilors, we had a similar order last meeting for 350, which was the mayor's standard annual allotment out of available funds for stabilization to keep us above the 5% DOR recommended level. This $500,000 is being appropriated in anticipation of needing it in 2 years or 3 years?
3 or 4.
3 or 4 years. For related to the debt incurred for the new Crocker Elementary School and library renovation project. If you recall at those meetings, what we initially estimated 2-3 years ago to cost for these projects exponentially grew because of inflation, cost of materials, cost of construction. It was somewhat of a sticker shock. And so we had to borrow more city funds to pay the difference that MSBA would not cover for Crocker and what the Library Board of Commissioners would not cover for the extra. I know our state delegation, Senator Cronin and Representative Kuchmarek, are in discussions with the legislative body and on the library side to increase the Library Board of Commissioners funding to account for the fact that not just Fitchburg, it's several cities and towns in this Commonwealth that are on the list for library renovations. They too are feeling the pain of this inflation. So the state delegation is working on increasing the funding to cover some of that increase. So hopefully they're successful within this year. But long story short, during those presentations, we were explained by the auditor and the mayor that in order to cover that extra cost in the meantime, the borrowing amount on our end would have to go up. And so in anticipation of that, the mayor was suggesting that in addition to the $350 he always puts in, it would require another $500,000 on top of that this year, next year.
3 years.
3 years. So for the next 3 years, this year, 2024, 2025, we will have to put $500,000 into stabilization so that 4 years from now, when the bill comes due for the budget, we can withdraw that money. So I would say think of this appropriation and the next two, again, not the $350, that's going to stay in stabilization. This $500,000 is being put in now so that 4 years from now we're going to take it out. So this is really just like a savings account. You know you're going to pay for something in 3 years. We're putting the money away now. So it's there in 3 or 4 years to withdraw from, so that when we withdraw money out of stabilization for budget purposes, that total stabilization number will still be at 5.5+% of our budget, which is what the DOR recommends. So we're putting it in now to take it out later. I hope I didn't butcher that explanation, but President Zarella?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that point that this is responsible fiscal management. We know this cost is coming, and we know from long past experience what happens if instead of anticipating it, we kick the can down the road and say, well, in 4 years we'll find the money somewhere. Then whoever's on the council in 4 years is going to be sitting there cursing our names for leaving them with that situation. So instead, we're thinking ahead. We have the money now. This is coming out of available funds. Actually, it doesn't say that here. Is that correct? Is this coming out of available funds?
Oh, yes, it does. I'm sorry. Yep. Available funds, yep.
So this is coming out of available funds. In other words, essentially budgetary surplus from the last fiscal year, and we're banking it so that we don't have to scramble and find things to cut in 4 years. This is a good thing. This is positive. This is how we avoid some of the problems that all of us here on the council have been kind of playing catch up on for as long as we've been here. So I thank the auditor and the mayor for doing this in a forward-thinking manner, and I think this should be a no-brainer for the council.
Council Boschman.
Just wonder what the chair know, that it was on that pink piece of paper that Kelvin passed out to us that explained it a couple months ago, what they were planning on doing. So, and Anthony, when you said that they won't be swearing at, they're already swearing at us now. So,
The future council is swearing at us already? Probably.
right now, thank Kelvin, because that's good thinking on his part, as the city auditor.
Motion to approve?
Second?
Motion made and seconded to approve 2233. If there are no objections, I'll take this unanimous consent. Seeing none, it passes. 2323, in order that there be and hereby is appropriated the sum of $2,620 to be charged against available funds and credit to the assessor's expenses contracted services. Chief Assessor Paquette.
Yes, good evening, councilors. This request came about as last year when we were going over the process of the budget. I received a quote from Real Estate Research Consultants, who's a personal property valuation consultant that we are now using, and the estimate came through at $33,000. What ended up happening, though, was one of our largest personal property accounts ended up having to be split into, and it requires, per contract, $3,000 per utility, so the 504 valuations. Unitil in years prior was assessed as Unitil Gas and Electric. However, according to DOR mandates, they are supposed to be assessed separately. So the initial estimate of $33,000 ended up going over by $2,630. So, as a point of reference, that account paid $2.8 million last year in taxes, and this company also brought in $480,000 in additional growth of personal property.
Make a motion, we accept.
Second?
Motion made and seconded to approve 2323.
Thank you.
There are no objections. It is passed. Thank you. Okay, 2423, order that there be and hereby is appropriated the sum of $14,885 to be charged against available funds and credited to the following accounts. Facilities, Personal Services, $2,454. Council on Aging, Personal Services, $6,708. Library Personal Services, $5,723. And these pertain to the SCIU inspector's contract being settled last spring, and the city made the appropriate retroactive adjustments to employees covered by the contract. After the start of the current fiscal year, additional changes were made on the placement of certain employees within the matrix, and because of this recent change, additional funding will be required to cover the additional costs for this fiscal year, as well as the retroactive adjustments for the 2 years prior. And that was a letter from Auditor Brooks to the mayor, and we have Ms. Davis here from HR to, is there anything you'd like to add, ma'am, to that?
No.
Opening up to
Anybody's got any questions? Good evening.
Opening up to the committee for any questions?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve 2423's appropriation. If there are no objections, it is passed.
Thank you.
$2523, in order that there be and hereby is appropriated the sum of $435,000, same to be charged against available funds and credited to the following accounts. Police Personal Services, $398,000. Police Personal Services overtime, $30,000. And employee benefits, other benefits, $7,000. And this is the letter from Ms. Davis on this one. Please find attached to be the memorandum of agreement and related documents for the recently concluded negotiations between the City of Fitchburg and the Fitchburg Police Union. This agreement is applicable to fiscal years 2023 through 2025, which is July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2025. As a result of these successful negotiations, I am requesting an appropriation from available funds for $435,000. This figure represents police personnel. I just read that. Just reading the MOA, I already gave the duration. Since I get asked this all the time, the wages, Article 4, Section 4.1, effective July 1st, 2022, wages shall be increased by 2.5%. and there's an asterisk on that. For any retroactive payments, an employee must have been in the bargaining unit as of July 1st, 2022, and must continue to be in the bargaining unit through ratification. Effective July 1st, 2023, wages will increase by 2.5%, and July 1st, 2024, 2.5%. So it's a 2.5% increase for each of the fiscal years within this agreement. Chief Martineau, Ms. Davis, is there anything you'd like to add to what I read before I open it up for questions?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the members of the Fitchburg Police Union for negotiating in such a professional manner over the course of 4 or 5 months to get to a point of resolution. Sometimes contractual talks can be difficult, to say the least. I can say that this is my 3rd contract that I've negotiated with the Fitchburg Police Union, and each and every time they act in a professional manner, and they're looking out for the interest of their membership, and they understand that we're looking out for the interest of the city and their membership. So I'd like to just personally go on record thanking the members of the Fitchburg Police Department and the collective bargaining group, the Fitchburg Police Union, for negotiating in a professional manner in so a way that we were able to come to some type of agreement in what I think is a fairly quick time. So thank you.
Motion to approve?
I had a question.
Yes, Council Boschman.
On Article 4, Section 4.2 in your contract here, can you explain to me why we increased the salaries on the specialty pays from $1,500 to $2,500, basically, almost all except for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Sure. So as you can see, prior to this change in this memorandum, we had different stipend rates for different specialty jobs. Specialty jobs are anything outside the uniform division, i.e. school resource officers, detectives, canines. And this stipend is a compensation for several different reasons. First of all, for the level of training that goes into those positions. But second of all, because they're outside of the uniform division, they don't have access to certain things that the uniform members have, such as overtime and different specialty assignments. Because we had different amounts, it created a disparity within the department. And this was an area that I thought that we could bring some unity within the department. Much like many places, diversity has an impact on any organization. We wanted to create a uniform scale for these stipends. These stipends are one-time payments. They don't go towards overtimes. They don't go to a lot of things. It's an effective way to compensate employees. And by increasing it by that $1,000 per specialty item, we thought we accomplished a couple of things. We're recognizing the hard work that goes into training for some of these specialty jobs, but more importantly, bringing the department in a unified manner where everybody's receiving the same compensation.
All right. And I noticed that on the next page, you went from 8.5 to 9% on the basis of a 3rd step patrol officer?
Yes.
And what's that?
So that increase there was due in result of our negotiations as it's relative to body cameras. Body cameras, as you're well aware of, in the labor world, it's a change in working conditions, which prompted me to have negotiations with the Fitchburg Police Union. Across the Commonwealth, as cities and towns are moving towards body cameras, they're in negotiation with the municipalities. I thought we reached a fair agreement with the union, that 0.5%. By creating this change in work conditions, but more importantly, by bringing that level of police service to the community, we thought this was a good position to put it in. Seeing what other communities negotiated for body cameras, I can tell you without a fact the city of Fitchburg did extremely well, and I'm grateful that the union accepted that 0.5% in lieu of body cameras coming to the Fitchburg Police Department.
You know how you were just talking to us about that 480 down to 240? I read all about that in your thing. The other thing I noticed you got another day off. That brings you up to 13.
That was citywide.
Yeah.
That's
citywide.
That's not specific to one department or other. That was a citywide, something we had to memorialize within a collective bargaining agreement.
Due to a change in the state law.
change in state law.
Juneteenth.
Juneteenth.
Only in government do I see all that. I guess that would be it. I'll make a motion, we accept.
On the motion as well.
Yeah, so I have Council Van Hazinga, Council Cruz. I just wanted to ask one quick thing. This MOA, is this available for public consumption in terms of,
Yes, yep.
is there anywhere, I get asked this all the time, is there, same with the fire department, I mean, there are clearly several pages to this. I only read the wage increase because that's the primary question that is asked all the time and that most people or everybody can relate to in terms of, look, forget everything. What's the salary increase? You know, that's what I. Right. So if someone wanted to access this, is it online or do you have to get a copy at the?
No, typically what happens is once this is done and then approved and everything is all signed off by council, until these items are integrated into the actual contract, these are on the HR website, on the page. Okay. So it will be the existing contract plus this MOA, right. And then you see those two disappear, and then the integrated CBA appears.
So if members of the public want to read these MOAs or read the contract as revised, it is accessible on the city's website through the HR office? Correct. On the HR webpage
Once
of the
everything
website.
is done, signed, sealed, and delivered, yes.
Right, okay.
Yep.
I have Councilor Cruz.
Councilor Van Hazinga, I believe.
Okay, Councilor Van Hazinga, sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, I'm pretty happy with the changes. I think it's great that you were able to reach a friendly agreement to have these increases. They seem reasonable considering the rate of inflation that we've gone through in the last year or two. Because, you know, really as I'm looking at it, we have the responsibility to be fiscally prudent in managing the city's finances, but also to make sure we're adequately staffed and we can attract officers to serve in our department. I just wanted to just generally, how does the compensation available to our patrolmen compared to that in other communities? Are we competitive in terms of attracting officers and compensating them?
I mean, that's a great question, Councilor. I think one of the highlights that I'd like to emphasize on this MOA is the ability that we made changes to our educational incentive. I made it abundantly clear to the mayor's office that that was an extreme priority of mine, that we needed to become more competitive in the recruitment world for police officers. Myself and my staff, we would go to recruiting events and we would have 20-somethings asking us if we had the Quinn Bill. They didn't even know what the Quinn Bill meant, but they just wanted to know, does the city of Fitchburg have the Quinn Bill? Back in over a decade ago, maybe even longer, because of financial constraints in the city, the Quinn Bill was eliminated to what it used to look like, and we started grandfathering people that were already in the system, and then there was a 6-year window where you wouldn't receive any educational incentive. Quite frankly, that was probably one of the biggest hindrances we had in the police department in recruitment of new talented personnel to become police officers, and I think we made leaps and bounds on our ability to recruit by bringing back that educational incentive as close as we could to the former Quinn standards. That's one area in this agreement that I'm most ecstatic about, along with the reduction in compensatory time. But our ability to provide that to future recruits, not only future recruits, but members of my department right now that have 1 or 2 years on, they're going to start receiving that compensation immediately, which may deter them from looking to go somewhere else. So I think it's not only a recruitment tool, it's huge on a retention tool. So for that, I'm extremely grateful.
Previous to that, it had been 6 years for that incentive to take effect. So I think certainly with the employment landscape being what it is and the challenges that the chief faces, that certainly moved us into a greatly, good spot for the competition.
Mm-hmm. In terms of training of the officers, is there a monthly number of hours that you budget that a typical officer will go through?
Sure. We have minimal standards set forth by the Municipal Police Training Council. A full week of in-service is required by all police officers. Obviously, we far exceed that 40-hour minimum. Now we have certain standards that are presented to us by post. certain training expectations that we have to live up to through the obligations through the police officer standard and training. So the minimum is 40 hours to in-service, but it goes much beyond that. We do additional firearms training. We do additional use of force training. We're always training on less than lethal use of force. Our training regimen is highlighted on our annual report. And like I said earlier when I was talking about overtime, the money best spent by the city of Fitchburg is geared towards training, because having a well-trained police force will prevent or help you out down the road when something horrific happens in the community. So we do spend a significant amount of time and effort and money on training.
So is it developed and administered by in-house staff, or do you bring in contractors, or is it a mixture of both?
I would say it's a combination of both. I do have a full-time training division. Captain Genie, who presented earlier this evening, oversees training within the department. He has a sergeant that works under his command. And we do a lot of in-house organization. We're very fortunate to have a full-time armorer that instructs in our department on use of force, less than lethal force, anything that is in that arena. We're very fortunate we have some police officers that teach at the university in the 4+1 program. I can't tell you enough how important it is to have that type of collaboration with Fitchburg State. We have premier law enforcement training right in our backyard, and we have members of our department that are on staff up there teaching.
Oops, you okay? Excuse me, I fell off my chair. Slid off my chair.
It wasn't
Sorry.
me, was it?
No. No.
If I'm over talking.
That happened twice this year to me, and it was when the cameras weren't on. I slid
want me
off
to
my
stop,
chair.
I'll stop.
I swear I didn't faint. No,
Okay.
I'm sitting on the edge of my
What you're
chair.
telling us is very
and I slid.
impressive.
Yes.
I can't wait to see
Jeez,
social media
man.
on that one.
Well, eventually it was going to happen sooner or later during the meeting, so continue. I apologize. I'm sitting now in the back
I know
of the
we're
chair.
branching a little off the labor negotiations, but I appreciate your willingness to share the information, and it's interesting to learn.
And just like the contracts, our annual report is available through the Whittier City website. It outlines all of the training our police officers go through, and I would put that up against any department in the state, that we are a extremely well-trained agency.
That's very comforting to hear. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Councilor Cruz. Councilor Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. It's really great to hear that this was negotiated with respect and in good faith, and that both sides are happy with it. We always talk about supporting our police officers here in the city of Fitchburg, and paying a fair wage is putting our money where our mouth is, and it's the way to do that. So I'm glad to see that this was done and taken care of, and I'll yield the floor.
Thank you. President Zarella?
I'll just say it on the motion. I don't have a question, so
You can have it all.
I'll second the motion.
Well, okay, so motion made and seconded. President Zarella.
So on the motion, I just want to also, as Chief Martineau mentioned, I want to thank the chief and the union for, and our HR department for conducting a successful and amicable negotiation. I have heard stories in other municipalities, not necessarily surrounding cities and towns, but other municipalities in the state and in the country, where these kinds of contract negotiations turn into an outright tug of war, with both sides trying to scrabble for every advantage that they can squeeze out. And I just want to say I've been very pleased since getting involved in Fitchburg government that is not a situation we have here with the police union, with the fire union. I haven't directly interacted with our other employee unions all that much, but I've been very pleased with the level of cooperation that we have between our city executive departments and our unions. Everyone's pulling in the same direction. Everyone's got their own needs, their own priorities, but everyone understands that we all want the same thing for the city. I just think that needs to be highlighted, and I think that needs to be highlighted every year when we come out of these, or every few years when we come out of these negotiations. because it's not something that happens everywhere. And it is one of the very nice things about living in Fitchburg and being involved in Fitchburg city government.
May I make just a closing comment? And I won't knock you
We
off
have a
your
motion
chair.
made and seconded, so council rules prohibit me from.
Well, I can withdraw
Okay.
my motion for the chief, after all.
You want to withdraw it?
I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay, Chief, go ahead.
Just real quickly, I'd like to thank and commend the mayor's office for his involvement in these successful negotiations, but more importantly, our HR director, Ms. Davis. You're going to hear very shortly the fire department coming up and explaining how they successfully negotiated. That's a lion's amount of work to negotiate two of your largest unions in 1 year, and now we're both on the same scale. So a lot of credit goes to the mayor's office, but also Ms. Davis in her office. So I'd like to publicly thank them as well. Thank you.
So I will just, my comments on this are, you know, for the body of work that the police department does on behalf of the citizens, it's a job that I could not do. It's a job that I greatly respect and admire in terms of bravery, courage, and selflessness. And, you know, people, every time we talk about contracts, salaries for public employees, there is a negative stigma out there among some members of the public that, well, I didn't get this. Why are we giving it to, you know, if I don't get it, why is everybody else getting it in terms of an increase or benefits or stipends? The reason why I wanted to point out the 2.5% per year is because that is the main comparison that John and Jane Q taxpayer use in terms of what they get for an increase every year in their paychecks, whether they're public or private. And I may get in trouble for saying this with a lot of taxpayers, but 2.5% is not an unreasonable amount, especially in the line of work that these men and women are in. And I may also get in trouble with some other people within, you know, well, don't say that because, you know, I mean, everybody wants 10, 15, 20%, but 2.5 is a reasonable number. And as someone who's a member of the private sector, that's pretty standard from what I get in my company anyway, every year is 2.5, 3. So from my own personal seat, and I know there's a lot of people out there that don't get anything. So it's a hard balancing act to explain and defend, but in terms of municipal government and union negotiations, and my experience over 17 years doing this, I remember in 08, 09, 10, these public employees took massive hits. They were not getting 2.5%. 2.5% would have been a godsend for them. I remember getting contracts where it was 0.002 or 1.11, or 1% is nothing. I'm sorry, it's nothing. 2.5 is a comfortable number to me, considering how the city is doing financially. But again, you know, we have inflation metrics out right now that are 3, 4, 5 times that number. So, you know, when I got my 2.5% last year, wonderful. My grocery bill up $200 a month. That's more than what I got. So I just hope that people take everything they hear into perspective, not only the jobs these men and women do, especially, but also the value is not unreasonable. And in times of financial strife that this city has been in, I want to say through 2008 to 2013, these employees were taking nothing. And they didn't like it, who the heck would, but they took it. So that is why I was very hard on the unions 10, 15 years ago because of the cuts that we had to sustain because of the financial strife we were in terms of not voting for these contracts. But I am not in a position right now to say no to these kinds of contracts because of the reasonableness of the percentage, the work that they do, which has always been the case, but the fact that the city can't afford it. We have to keep paying competitive salaries in this city, or officers and firefighters will just go somewhere else. It's like anything else in the private sector. Someone's offering you more money, you go to it. So we have to factor that into these discussions, obviously, and I know that is. And so I have no hesitation voting for this for those reasons. But I just wanted to, again, put that in perspective. I would totally understand people if it was 4%, 5%, 6%, that's unreasonable. Even though the work, you could say, more than qualifies for it, it's just not congruent with what many people see, nor the financial realities we're in. But 2.5 is a very comfortable number to me, and it's a number that I normally don't see. It's been far less than that over many years. So this isn't the standard, is what I'm saying. We would like it to be, but every year, every contract negotiation, there's mitigating factors that would determine what that number would be. So I'm glad that we got through it, and I thank the men and women of the FPD for the work that they do and for protecting the city day in and day out.
May I, one quick,
Yes.
quick
Yep.
addition? I just want to say, obviously, with all of the unions, I negotiate all of these contracts with, department heads or lawyers, or I do want to say it definitely, both of these negotiations that we've recently completed, with police and fire, none of the unions, whether it's these two or any of the unions that I'm currently negotiating with, our employees are being very reasonable and very looking to just say they understand we can't do 4, 5, 6, 7%, and all their requests have been. It's been really a good experience to just be able to try to obviously get them where, like you say, in terms of the private sector, whether it's maybe 2 or 3%. But these groups are making our lives certainly easier because they are being very reasonable. They just obviously, people want to get paid for obviously what they do. And certainly what you mentioned in the past, groups taking zeros. So, certainly you will see whether it's with these contracts or the ones coming up, it's really just trying to get people where they should be.
Yeah, one thing on that before I open it up to a vote. Mr. Otter, do you happen to know off the top of your head what the salary line item, personal services for the police? The total budget?
I do.
I should know this off the top of my head. I know the whole budget's over $8.5 million, but what's just the PS line?
Are you looking at personal services?
Yeah, just personal services.
Personal services is...
No, just the whole thing. From
the
chief
revised
down to-
budget on personal services was $8,594,541.
Right.
8,006.
That's personal services?
That's what we pay for the police department and personal services. Yes.
Okay. So that if I take that number divided by 150 million, it's 5.5% of the budget. So, 95% of the taxpayer budget, the budget the taxpayers pay, does not go to the FPD. And it's a similar number of the fire department. I know the fire department's a little smaller, around 8 million, but again, when you combine the two, it's 10% of the budget. 10%. So it doesn't encompass a great deal of the budget, even though they're the two biggest departments outside of schools and the employee benefits aspect of health insurance and pension. But it's a small percentage of the overall budget. So, we are getting a good bang for our buck, is what I'm trying to say. It's not consuming the budget so that we cannot function. It's a very small portion of it, even with these adjustments that we agree to every 3 years. So just to put that in the broader perspective of the whole budget package.
Motion to approve.
Second.
A motion made and seconded to approve 2523. If I see no objections to the motion, it's approved. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Last item on the agenda is 2623, in order that there be and hereby is appropriated the sum of $532,000 to be charged against available funds and credited to fire personal services $494,000, fire personal services overtime $15,000, employee benefits, other benefits $23,000, amended by City Council on January 17th, 2023 to read as follows. The numbers are actually $465,000, down from 532 was the amendment, and that is 420 for the fire personal services, 18,000 for fire personal services overtime, and 27,000 for employee benefits, other benefits. And as I did in the previous one, the letter here from Ms. Davis. This MOA order encompasses the successful negotiations between the City of Fitchburg and the International Association of Firefighters Local 3128. This agreement is applicable to fiscal years 2023 to 2025, so same dates as the police agreement. As a result of these negotiations, the appropriations are requested as I've stated, and I'll just add here the duration is the same, and Article 19, Section D, Section 19.7, wages. Again, this will be on file on the website once the new contract is put up for the public to review at their leisure. This contract encompasses the same as the police, 2.5% wage increase effective in each July 1st of 2022, so that's retroactive, 2023 and 2024. So 2.5% annually for each of the 3-year agreement. Anything to add?
Yeah, I would like to thank Susan Davis during these negotiations. This is my first contract that I've had to deal with. Her in her office were very professional, very knowledgeable. I'd also like to thank the mayor's office, more importantly, Natalia Oliver. She was a big help through this whole thing. And also the union, Local 3128, the firefighters union. They came to the table with a very open mind, and as Ms. Davis mentioned earlier, they came with nothing but reasonable requests. I think put that all together, and that's why this came together very smoothly and very quickly. So thank you, Susan.
Council Boschman.
Question. Well, first question is going to be for Sue Davis. November 22nd, but we're voting on this budget in January 23. My question to you, no, I'm not looking for an argument. What happens if this council right here said no to this, but we already paid them X amount of money for a year? Why are we getting this so late? We're in January 23. You know what I mean? It says, and I'm reading November 22nd. We should say if I vote no, Marcus votes no, and Andy votes, all the councilors up here say no to this contract.
Councilor, I believe the police one that you just voted on was the same date.
Was it?
July 1st, 2022. It's retroactive.
Yeah.
I don't, not to upstage you, but on your question, it's a timing factor, right? I mean, these negotiations don't take place over one meeting or one sit-down.
Oh, gosh, no.
Because Councilor Boschman's point, I gather, is if we know the contract is expiring on June 30th, 2022, do negotiations take place prior to that, or do they have to begin after the expiration?
No, they all pretty much have a clause that says, so after January 1st, for instance, of 2022, they can request negotiations to begin because it is expiring on June of 22. Typically, yeah, we would like to have these start before they're going to expire. And I'm trying to think of when I apologize because I don't know the first date of when we started these negotiations.
It was in June.
But it was in June.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, typically we would like to start that before. It's not. It really, honestly, just depends on, other factors that certainly, may affect that.
I mean, if we approve this like the police, it just supplements the budget for the current fiscal year.
Correct.
Right.
And we haven't paid anything on this contract yet.
Right.
We have it?
We haven't. No, sir. No, because it hasn't been approved.
Oh, okay.
So that's what this appropriation involves.
Once there's an appropriation, we would then
I
go
thought
back.
we were already paying for it.
No, sir. We would go back and do a retroactive payment to them and adjust their pays.
Oh, okay.
Until this contract is ratified and funded, the existing contract still is in effect.
Correct.
So they're paid at that old contract's rate until this gets revised, and that's what this funding does, is it pays for the first year of it, which is fiscal year 23, July 1st, 2022 start, retroactive back to that first date, and then in 2024, FY 2024 and FY 25's budget, this contract will be in those two budgets, so there will not be a free cash appropriation. The free cash appropriation is just for the current fiscal year because on July 1st, we didn't have a new contract yet.
All right.
So that budget was based on the old
I
contract.
just thought we were paying for it prior, that's
No.
why. That's the reason. So
That goes
I'm
for,
sorry
that
about
goes for all, that goes for every contract
All right.
in the city. That's just, that's standard.
All right, I get some questions on this contract. Now, I read the paperwork that you sent out to the council in the package. I noticed that you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. But when I start reading it, like, I'll give you a prime example. You got a 17% between the ranks of a captain for so many years on that one there. You see a 100% increase from the beepers to $600 from $300. You got let's see, a member here. You got from a lieutenant, a rate of a lieutenant who has completed 25 years of service or more should be paid 8.5 above a regular lieutenant rate, a lieutenant's rate. So, my question to you, is it really 2.5% or is it more on some of these employees? Because you're given an 8.5% increase over, say, if Andy starts as a lieutenant and I get 25 years, I get 8.5% more than he does. And you're not the same any longer. You're higher because I get more time than him. Am I saying that right, Council? Mr. Chair? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, yeah, the 2.5% is the base salary, and then there's stipends that are involved in that. The moving of between rate from 15 to 17%, I guess that was an issue that happened 3 years ago between contracts, something that was, I guess, neglected to get put into the fire contract, but was in the police contract. So that's why that was put in. Rather than open the contract up 3 years ago, Local 3128 was good enough to say, you know what, we'll bring that to the table in 3 years, which they did, and the city kept their word and gave it to them.
And those percentages are actually within the city code that says, you know, in terms of what those percentages need to be between the ranks, you know, whether it's sergeant, captain, lieutenant, or where we had no sergeants. Yeah, but that's in the code. It's in the city code. And so that was a change to that.
All right.
And again, I will say certainly with this, as Councilor Di Natale certainly offered, again, we need to remain competitive with other communities within this employment landscape. And obviously, it's, you know, with public safety, as with other groups as well, certainly, we need to be able to remain competitive. And some of these, for example, one of the items that's in here is an emergency medical dispatcher. Well, if you've got laws that change and this department works in conjunction with the police department in regard to dispatching, well, now they've got additional responsibilities and additional duties. And I don't think it's unreasonable to be compensated for additional duties. So some of the costs in here are related to items such as that, whether it's either additional duties or, again, you know, remaining competitive. One of the things that we also did in this contract, it's the same as the police, well, similar to the police contract, had to do with the education incentive as well. There are a lower number of firefighters, I think, that probably have degrees. However, just as important. So that also, you know, was a change. So you'll see some of those costs in there as well.
Yeah, I understand, but what I have a hard time with is why are we paying $600 for a beeper? That's my argument, to carry a beeper.
Well, that's because all the firefighters are on call. So at any moment, they can be called and be brought into work if we have any sort of major event, major fire. And in the past, we used to give them a beeper.
Right.
Now we don't. They use their own personal phone. They pay for it, they buy it. So this compensates them not only for being on call, but also for using their own personal equipment, so that we can get in touch with them and bring them in if needed.
All right. Well, I didn't say phone, it said beeper.
Yeah, that's just verbiage, but everybody uses their own personal phone now.
All right.
So,
I didn't know that.
and that's another way we get in touch with them for overtime and anything like that. So that's their own personal phone that they pay monthly.
Okay. All right. I yield the floor.
President Zarella?
I just want to note on the issue of negotiation timings, because Ms. Davis isn't going to say it in her own defense, but there was a massive backlog in negotiations due to COVID, because you can't get people around a table if you can't get people in the same room together. I can't say for certain whether negotiations could be successfully conducted over Zoom, but having done meetings over Zoom, I wouldn't want to be doing that. So that is part of the reason that a lot of our contracts are being settled retroactively this year. It's not because the HR department was slacking off or because the because the unions or employees were dragging their heels or anything. It's because the country shut down for a year and a half. And so honestly, it's a testament to the hard work of both the HR department and the bargaining units that we're not further behind on this. So I just want to make that clear for anyone listening in. I don't imply that Councillor Brochman was saying otherwise. It's just it was a fair point to raise, and I want everyone at home to know that this was not just, we wanted to get it done ahead of time, but oops, we dropped the ball. That's not what happened. That said, I think, just as I said on the previous contract, I think this is very fair, very well negotiated. I appreciate the effort that went into it on both sides, and I fully support it.
Thank you.
So all the comments, just because the police was first, but I'm not going to repeat it all, but my comments about the police officers and command staff applies the same way to the fire department. As well as the salary adjustments and what have you. Again, as someone who works in the private sector, education incentives, I have that. Retirement incentives, I have that. And I have a salary. And, like working for the city, any private sector, you sign up for that job knowing what your compensation is. And we should incentivize our employees to get higher education, no different than the private sector. And yes, if there is work beyond the scope that they are contracted for, that should be compensated. I always joke every 3 years, not joke, but in jest, not even in jest, just I laugh about it because I have a personal affinity for the firefighters as someone who's a non-firefighter. I always say every time we have these contracts, I know more about firefighting as a non-firefighter than anyone else, other than the fire department themselves, because I lived next to the Roy family for 25 years. So I got a training course from PJ on the appropriateness of firefighting at the age of 5. So I know the equipment, I know the protocols, I know about writing reports. He made me write reports at 6 years old. It was amazing. I remember his brother Sean used to say that, I don't write, he goes. But anyway, but I got an appreciation as a young kid for what they do. And just like the police, when everyone's running off, they're going in. And so, and I know the public appreciates this and supports this as well. So all of the comments that I made about the police officers pertain to the firefighters as well. And the fact that we are financially able to provide a reasonable compensation adjustment, especially in the times we're in right now with inflation, where I don't know anybody in the private or public sector that's getting raises that compensate for the increase in costs across the board. It goes without saying, but we thank them for their efforts. And my experience 15 years ago with these negotiations and then the votes, far and above a different than where we are today. I remember there used to be standoffs, negotiations would drag on for a year, maybe two. So it's also a testament to the financial health of this city that we're able to fairly compensate these unions at these levels, because we were surprised 10 years ago if we saw a 2 number on the page, 2%. I mean, we were lucky if there was 1. So that's the perspective I bring to this, but it's reasonable, it's earned, and it's appreciated. Thank you, everyone, for your efforts.
Thank you. If I could add something to that.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a big push for training, always has been with Fitchburg Fire, but I would say over the last 2 years we've been pushing even harder. And when I said the union came to the table with an open mind, there's a lot of things in here where they have to take classes that they don't get paid for, and they do it on their own time. We will give them the day off if they're working that day, but there's a lot of stuff in here where they have to go to the Mass Fire Academy, take these classes, whether it's Fire Officer 1, 2, Incident Safety, Fire Prevention, but they're all doing this on their own time, and there's no extra compensation for it.
And that's required training, right? I mean, the police and they have massive amounts of certification requirements.
Correct.
To keep that is state, and I would assume maybe even federally mandated, but certainly state mandated.
Correct. Yeah.
So yeah, the compensation is required. I mean, they have to do it. I know they want to do it, but they have to do it.
Yeah.
But there should always be education incentives too, just to get your fire. New firefighters, they have to have a fire safety degree.
They do not.
Not fire safety. What's it called?
Fire science degree.
Fire sciences. Okay.
Yeah, they do not have to have it, but they can get it, and I do push for them to get it because obviously the more educated they are, the better firefighters they're going to be for the city. So,
yep.
Education's really big for me.
Councilor Van Haasega?
So is the department currently fully staffed right now, or do we have budgeted positions we're trying to fill to catch up?
No, we're fully staffed.
That's great. And how does the level of compensation that we're looking at in this agreement compare to other communities? Are we competitive in attracting and retaining staff?
Yes, we're very competitive. Fortunately for me, I don't have the same issues that Chief Martineau does, losing personnel. When it comes to firefighting, people actually want to come to the city and be a part of the Fitchburg Fire Department. I could say that probably in my 27 years, maybe only 5 people have left on their own. So that just shows, that's a testament to the Fitchburg Fire Department and how we retain the firefighters that do come here. So big savings for the city in that sense also.
That's really reassuring to hear, both financially and also just the culture that you have at the department. That's great. Thank you.
Councilor Bushman?
One final question. Could you explain to me section 22.6.1 personal days and accrued time off? I'm kind of puzzled.
Yep, so this was actually, in terms of the personal time, actually, I know you did a lot, obviously, the research on this. I don't want to jump in on it. But I'll let the chief, because he did was behind this.
So one thing that the city wanted to push for is to make the contract readable and understandable for everybody. If you looked at this contract before we came to this agreement, there was a lot of things where if you were on 5 years, you got this. If you were only on 2 years, you didn't get that sort of thing. So now it's basically across the board. Everybody gets the same incentives. When it comes to personal day accrual, what we did was firefighters wouldn't be able to attain those until after a couple of years, and even then they were only getting a percentage. So what we did was we gave it to everybody, so everybody's the same. But now we added, before it used to be if you didn't call in sick for 3 months, you would get a personal day. Now you have to go 6 months. When I did the math, the city saves at least 9 personal days throughout the year. So it's actually a savings for the city.
So we brought some people that weren't getting any up to 1, and then some people that were getting more than 1 shift or what more down to 1. So the net was a savings, and like the chief said, the other contracts, you get that extra bonus day, whether, it's a half day. For the most part, most of the contracts are half days that you might get, but it's after 6 consecutive months that you get that extra time. And this was because their contract was less than that. So overall, we saved. We've made it more uniform and saved money and time by doing that.
All right. Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you.
Motion to approve?
I won't go into double down too much more, but I just want to reiterate what I've said in the past, especially now more than ever after the pandemic, when you and the police department, you can't zoom into an unresponsive, and you do a great service to the city of Fitchburg, and I'm glad this was
Thank you, Councilor.
negotiated for fairly, and the city's happy with it, and I'm happy with it, so.
Thank you.
Motion approved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve. There are no objections. I will take that as approval. Seeing none, it's approved by this committee.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion
you all
made and
very
seconded
much.
to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.